Welcome to episode 5 of Coffee and Co-Read, your source for all things literary, with Kristen
and Catherine, where we believe there's nothing better than a hot coffee and an awesome book. Join us for our virtual book club where we take one book a month and dive into all the drama, adventure, and romance we can find.
So today we are just going to have a little chat about one of our favorite authors, Sarah J. Maas, because we're starting one of her books today, and how we sort of accepted her into our lives and found her, made our lives better.
Exactly. So I got into Sarah J. Maas through you, Kristen, but how did you originally find her?
I actually originally found her at a bookstore. Obviously, I was just browsing and I found her first book, Throne of Glass, at a bookstore at the bargain table. I was just looking for something new to read. Had no idea what it was, but it looked like sort of my thing, so I bought it for like $10.
Which
I
is
finished.
cheap for books in where we're from.
Yeah. I finished it in a couple days and I immediately had to get the next one. I'm pretty sure I bought it on like Kindle or Google Books or whatever and finished. I think there were 3 out at that point. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
Finished that and I needed more. But obviously there were no more in that series. So I moved to her other series she had out, Akatar. I think she had one of those books out. So then I read that one and I was just hooked. And
Yeah.
A Court of Thorns and Roses, her second series, Akatar, is ultimately become my favorite series of all time. And Sarah J is my favorite author of all time. It was a great day. Finding that book on the bargain table was like such a good day for me.
Definitely. Yeah. So I obviously started reading Sarah J. Maas because you suggested or like aggressively suggested it for me. Um, I read Throne of Glass and I adored it. Um, like you, I ended up having to wait for all the books to come out, but I literally couldn't put them down. I loved every second of them. I found it harder to get into Aquatar than you did, but I still learned to love it over time. Uh, Throne of Glass is ultimately my favorite of the two, but I also love Crescent City so far because we haven't finished the second book. But when I first read this book, I didn't look at the back or anything. I was like, it's a Sarah J. Maas book. I'm gonna love it. Like I don't want to spoil it, so I didn't want to read the back or anything. And it definitely made for a shock after the first few chapters for me that I was not expecting. But still loved it.
It's one of the best things about her, I find, is that she is so good at incorporating twists and turns and making things shocking. Like you think that it's gonna go the way of your normal like romance fluffy like YA book,
Mm-hmm.
but it really doesn't.
Yeah.
Anyway, we are undertaking the massive journey of dissecting a Sarah J. Maas book. Heads up, her books are massive. There's a ton of stuff to get into. So heads up, we're not a spoiler-free zone, and things might get a little saucy.
Yeah, so Sarah J. Maas is a very popular young adult and now new adult author. She started writing her first book, Throne of Glass, when she was 16 and released it on Fiction Press. Throne of Glass now has 7 novels and a prequel of short stories. Her other popular series, A Court of Thorns and Roses, has 4 novels and a novella.
So far.
So far, yes, there's going to be more. I hope there's more Throne of Glass, but there's no word on that.
So the book we're starting today, it's the series called Crescent City. We're diving into book 1, which is called A House of Earth and Blood. So it's the first novel in the Crescent City series, and it follows our 2 main characters. Bryce is our female protagonist, and Hunt is our male protagonist, and they are trying to solve the murder of Bryce's best friend, Danica. So it's sort of like a murder mystery, but set
Hmm.
in fantasy, like a modern fantasy world.
Yeah.
It's really interesting. There are plans for at least 3 books in this series, with possibly more. SJM has come out and said that, uh, she can't imagine saying goodbye to all the characters that she's created. So, it could be possible that we get some more spin offs and novellas and that sorts of thing. The second novel, House of Sky and Breath, was released February 15th. Neither of us have finished it. So, while we're not a spoiler free zone, this is going to be House of Sky and Breath spoiler free. We're not going to delve into those spoilers because we haven't finished it yet. We don't know what's going to happen.
Um, as we're sure that anyone listening is aware, if you've read the book, there's a lot of world building in this book and mentioning of people before we meet them. So we're going to try to like kind of streamline it a bit because SJM does kind of talk about people a few times before you meet them, and then we'll kind of bring them up as they become important, maybe, or as we feel like we should, because it's just, we'd be talking forever, honestly, if we had to dissect every little piece. So we're going to get into our first week, which is chapters 1 to 14. And it starts off with part 1, The Hollow. Okay, so we start off with Bryce's point of view, and we meet Danica, and she is a shapeshifter wolf, and she shows up at Bryce's workplace, which is Griffin's Antiquities, which is clearly heavily fortified. It has an iron door, it has security cameras, it has grade A tech and spell work, and it's preserving books and other artifacts inside. And that's kind of like the main thing that we hear about it right away.
It sort of seems like it's almost like a gallery, like an antique gallery for fancy people.
Mm-hmm. And it kind of brings you in right away that, like, this is a world where there are security cameras and there's also spell work. So it's kind of an interesting world that we don't often find ourselves in fantasy, where there's modern technology as well as spells. So it's definitely interesting. I think the term is urban fantasy, what they call it when books do this, but definitely a great way to bring you into it immediately. So I love Bryce and Danica's banter immediately. It's clear that they're very close and they know how to rib each other, and they also know how to calm each other down. But it's just such a great portrayal of a friendship. And you can tell right off the bat that they're great friends.
Yeah, it's something that is they become, and we find out later they're so close that it's just something you could only like imagine, right? Like is having somebody that you have that sort of relationship with. Like it's so ideal.
Yeah. And I do think, like, if you've read other books by Sarah J. Maas, it is a bit different than normal. She doesn't normally have female friendships as her main focus in any parts. Like, there's always something that happens that makes it not the best friendship or something like that. But it's kind of refreshing to have like this kind of relationship in a book, in any book, not even Sarah J. Maas, but any book that has a relationship with friends that are this close. It's nice to see.
Yeah.
So Bryce remembers a night out 2 days ago when they smoked mirth root and they got matching tattoos. I'm assuming mirth root is similar to weed in this case, maybe stronger, because she does say that she doesn't remember anything that she wrote down. So I don't know. I've never got a tattoo high. I've gotten tattoos when I was a little tipsy and probably shouldn't have, but you'd think that they probably shouldn't have given her one, but I guess.
Yeah. It's is it like it's like a full back tattoo? It's like a bunch of
Yeah,
writing, and yeah,
seems
took her to get a
insane.
full back tattoo when she was high as a kite.
Yeah. And like, I guess she's part Fae. Obviously, Danica is a shapeshifter, so she heals even faster. And Bryce is part Fae. She heals a bit slower, but still faster than a human. So, like, a back tattoo wouldn't be as wild, but I can't imagine sitting for an entire back tattoo. So yeah, Bryce is half human, half fae, and Danica is the alpha of the Devil's pack of wolves. Yeah, like I said before, there's a lot of world building. They say that there's 6 Asteri. There used to be 7, and then one was basically murdered, and they rule over basically everything. And Micah is an archangel, and he rules this territory, and Crescent City is in the territory. And within Crescent City, there's 6 lower heads, and they rule with him, but they're not all equal.
So the way I see it is that you've got the 6 Asteri, which are like these like mystical beings that rule over everything. Micah is sort of like the president, and then he's got like his territory split into towns almost or quarters, and then there's a head of each quarter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So like he's still the head honcho that has the last say in everything, but I guess there are other people there to sort of do the menial ruling of each little section.
Yeah, exactly. And humans have like no head of house basically because they're too lowly. And this is the reason that Philip Briggs, who is a human, he's being released on a technicality. But this is the reason for his whole.
So he's a rebel human that
Yeah,
is being released from jail
yeah,
because he rebelled against humans not having enough rights in this land of
yeah,
Pangira.
yeah. So he's Pangaea is where the conflict is. In Crescent City, the conflict is not.
Right. So
So
there's a
yeah.
couple of different countries.
Hmm.
Crescent City is in the country of Vanbira. There
Hmm.
is currently a civil war happening in the country of Pangira next door.
Hmm. So Philip Briggs basically comes over from Pangaea and wants to bring the conflict to Vanbera. So he comes to Crescent City and he's trying to bring the conflict there. I don't know if we get into technicalities of it. Danica and her pack catch him before he can blow up the White Raven Club.
Right. He's trying to sort of assassinate people over there to bring the conflict over, and Danica stops him before he has the chance to kill a bunch of innocent people and
Yes.
sends him to jail.
And then he's now being released on a technicality. And that's where we are. Like, she's already sent him to jail with her pack. And now she's at the gallery and she's going to a meeting and she's like, they're going to let him go on a technicality. And she's obviously, rightfully, probably upset by this. And Bryce is trying to kind of comfort her a bit. But this is also how we're getting all this information in the beginning.
Right.
Um, Bryce talks about Connor, Danica's second, being conscious of the possibility of a phone hack. And I just wanted to kind of note that because it's a bit of foreshadowing for what happens to Bryce later on. Because he texts Bryce, and whatever he says, Bryce is like, she mentions for us basically that he doesn't want to say specifics because he's worried that his phone could get hacked. And then obviously we see later that Bryce's phone does get hacked. So it was a nice bit of foreshadowing that SJM put in there for us. And I kind of love pointing those out because like when you do your rereads of her books, you really see all the foreshadowing she puts in, and it's wild, really.
Yeah. She lays it out like breadcrumbs, but then you don't actually know that they are breadcrumbs.
You don't pick any of it up.
No, it's so good.
Yeah, I agree. So Danica is a gray wolf, so she comes up, she got a shower downstairs, comes up, and she's in wolf form. And she can apparently talk in wolf form, which I found interesting, but also weird would be the word I'd use. It unfortunately makes me think of furries. Like, I just don't know what that looks like.
I just I just don't know, like, is it a wolf whose mouth is moving and it sounds like a human? or is it a wolf and they're like projecting their mind, their thoughts out?
It's interesting. Definitely interesting. I'd love to see that portrayed in a movie or a show for sure. So they're out now. They left Griffin's Antiquities and they're walking around in Crescent City. So when they're walking, we get our first mention of the Umbra Mortis, which is Micah's personal assassin, and he has lightning in his veins. And he's obviously very terrifying and mighty. Um, Danica and Bryce also talk about Danica's mother, Sabine, and she seems like a giant bitch. She doesn't like Bryce at all, and she hated her from the beginning of ever meeting her. But it doesn't even seem like she likes Danica because she's basically jealous of her, it seems like, because Danica is very powerful and Danica's grandfather, who is obviously Sabine's mother, gave her the family heirloom sword on her 18th birthday when it apparently called to her, even though he had promised it to his daughter, who is Sabine.
It seems like we have a slight issue. It's like a running theme of parents being dicks.
Mm,
So like the first parent we're meeting is Sabine, and she is a dick.
yeah,
But at the same time, how is she a dick? Obviously, her dad must have raised her to be that way. So
yeah,
let's, place blame where it belongs. Sabine is being a bitch, but her dad did raise her. And then he snubbed her by not giving her the sword
yeah,
when it was supposed to go to her.
yeah. Oh, 100%. I can see where her anger comes from in some ways, but just being a bitch to Bryce for no reason when she first meets her is a bit much. But I know it's a different world, obviously.
Yeah.
So Jessica is Bryce's boss, and she is the owner of Griffin's Antiquities, and she wants Bryce to find Luna's horn. So Luna's horn was stolen from the temple during a power outage. And there are no suspects, there's no motive, and the person who stole it is clearly hidden away since there's nothing in the underground, nothing anywhere, no word of where it possibly could be. So Bryce is trying to look for this on her boss's orders, basically. Um, but she really has no idea where to go from here. And Danica kind of like wants her to drop it. But Bryce thinks that it would be a really good move for her career. And Danica kind of agrees that, yeah, it would be a good move, but she still thinks that Bryce should drop it. Just a bit of foreshadowing that we're just going to point out there.
Yeah, I think it's important to note too that again, it seems like we're jumping around a lot. It's literally so much world building and plot building the first few chapters. So like it's literally them standing there walking down the street and having a chat about all these different topics.
Yeah.
Just to take a quick survey, we've got Bryce and Danica, BFFs, Micah, the ruler of this country. We've got uh, Philip Briggs, who is this like fanatical rebel who's being released from prison. Then we've got Connor, who's Danica's second in command. We've got Sabine, Danica's mom, who's a terrible person. And then we've got Jessica, who is Bryce's boss and the owner of the antiquity place.
So, great recap. I need that all the time during the book, I find. Like, there's so much going on that I need a recap on the side. Bryce also talks about her necklace that she wears, and it's three entwined circles, and it's an Archesian amulet, and it protects her against certain magic. Um, So it's just something that she mentions. And Jessica gave it to her. And basically, everyone in her life tells her that she should keep wearing it all the time and never to take it off. And then she also says that if she ever leaves, she's going to try to find a way to take it with her. So, yeah, so it's obviously an important piece that just came up kind of in passing here. So, while they're still walking down the street, Bryce's mom calls her. And her mom's name is Ember. And unlike Sabine, Ember loves Bryce and Danica. She asks about coming to visit next week, and Danica tells Bryce's mom that they're going to be out of town and that they should reschedule for next month. And then basically they force her mom off the phone. Bryce doesn't want her mom there while Briggs is free. And Ember is obviously a very fierce woman and she's super protective of Bryce. And we get a few stories about that too.
Just to clarify, Ember is a human. She's the human half of Bryce's half human, half fae
Mm-hmm.
parentage.
Yeah. We hear now that Bryce knows how to defend herself, specifically with guns, which her real father, as she calls him, Randall, taught her how to use them. So they're highly regulated in this world, which is definitely interesting to note and obviously different from some places in the real world here for us.
He's not actually her real father. She's saying he's her real father because he's the one who raised her, not her biological father.
Yeah, we'll get into him later on, I'm sure. At this point, Bryce and Danica have been walking through the city and they're at the old square gate now. And there's a disc here which says touch at your own risk. And Bryce kind of explains that it used to be used for communication and it takes a small piece of your magic. And superstition now says that if you touch it, you can make a wish. So Danica kind of cuts the line and she takes out like her badge and she's like, this is for official business. And she really just wants to go up and get in the front of the line so that they can make a wish.
It's this disc is like a it's like a tourist attraction. So like Crescent
Mm-hmm.
City is the capital city. So like there's a bunch of tourists that come there and this disc has like a lineup of people almost like that like the Blarney Stone or that
Mm,
um when you go to Italy, you can put your hand in that weird thing is it at the Colosseum or something? You put your hand in this like obelisk on the wall. It's sort of like that. Like there's a huge lineup of people waiting to go.
yeah,
And then Danica skips the line because she's famous. Everybody knows who she is because she's the alpha of the pack of devils. So she's super
yeah,
famous.
yeah. Which is, I just love that part. I'm like, if you could do it, why not? Like, may as well. So they go up and they make wishes. We don't really hear what Danica's wish is. And then Bryce wishes that Danica got a manicure because her nails look awful. So it's kind of a funny moment, and I do love it. I love the humor in the book, but I do love this moment. It's really cute.
Well, they're shitting each other. They're being best friends. So they're ribbing each other. They're talking about random stuff and they're just living their lives.
Hmm. Bryce is worried that Briggs is going to come after Danica, especially since Danica hasn't made the drop into immortality yet. So this is our first mention of what the drop is. And we don't get a whole lot of information on it at this point. But everybody else in Danica's pack has already gone through the drop. Uh, Bryce and Danica kind of want to do it together, and they want to wait till they're 27 because they think that that is the best age to become immortal at because they don't have any wrinkles at that point, but they're not so young that they look like children. So, like, I kind of agreed. It also says that shifters can live up to 5 centuries, and Fae can live up to 1,000 years. And like we know, Bryce is half Fae, so we don't at this point really know how long her lifespan is.
Yeah.
So they do talk a little bit about what the drop is. It's the plunge into your power to face what's at the bottom and then a race back up before you die with a lack of oxygen.
It's almost like in my brain I think of it like a conscious thing. Like it's like you are delving so deep into your consciousness that you almost go brain dead,
Hmm.
and so your body is lacking oxygen because you're brain dead. Like oxygen is not reaching your brain. So you need to make sure that when you make the drop, you have enough time to get back up before you go brain dead.
Yeah. So every child basically takes a test when they're young, and Danica is expected to be insanely powerful, like probably more powerful than her mother or her grandfather, the Prime. Like she's expected to be at the top. And Bryce is not supposed to be powerful in any way, shape, or form, basically. She's like gonna do the drop, become immortal, and then just be the same as she was before, basically. They kind of talk about their other friends that they have. They kind of have a foursome group that they've had since they were in university. So it's Danica, Bryce, Fury, and Juniper. And Fury is an assassin type who does shady shit that we don't really hear about, and Bryce doesn't really want to know about in Pangea most of the time. And Juniper is a sweet fawn dancer.
So yeah, so she's a fawn. She's got what, goat legs or deer legs?
Dear, yeah.
Deer legs with hooves, and she's like a professional ballerina, which I can't really visualize. Like I can't really visualize deer hooves in like point shoes, but I mean,
Well,
I do.
you're naturally pointed, I guess.
Well, I guess, yeah.
That's all I can think of. I don't know much about dancing, but that's where my brain goes. um, so Danica went back to work, and then she had a non-eventful day and goes home. And at the apartment that she shares with Danica, so it's Bryce and Danica's apartment, the Pack of Devils is there. And there was a Sunball game the afternoon. And Sunball, basically, even Sarah J. Maas was like, Sunball is whatever the readers want it to be. Like if you read the book and you think it's baseball, then it's baseball. If you think it's football, then it's football. So it's not really anything. It's not a different game. It's not like Quidditch, but it's kind of whatever the reader thinks of it as.
I thought of it always as baseball.
Yeah, so I thought of Sunball as baseball too, or softball, baseball or softball. And in the Sunball game that was happening, Ethan, which is apparently Bryce's favorite person after Danica, um, he would normally be at the apartment, but he's out with the other players. So he is Connor's brother, and he's Bryce's, I guess, best friend after Danica, it seems like. So it just gives us a little more information into her friend group and what's happening. We get a little introduction into some of the pack members, and they're all fiercely devoted to Danica and each other. And they kind of treat Bryce like an unofficial member of the pack, which is really cool of them because they could easily be assholes to her because she is half human.
They definitely seem to accept her in their group, and really they've made like their own little family. They are super duper loyal to each other. I think she actually mentions that the whole reason they're all at that apartment is because it's their day off, and they always spend their day off together.
Yeah, exactly. Um, Briggs was released on the technicality. They couldn't keep him. And Bryce, during this conversation with Danica, kind of feels like she's keeping something from her. And then Danica confides in her that two CCU research students were killed near Luna's temple during the blackout, which was on Danica's shift. And it kind of makes it her fault, but also her mother called her out publicly in front of people, which also makes it even more devastating, I guess. Maybe not the right word, but makes it more.
It makes her feel more culpable.
Yes, exactly. So they were ripped to shreds, and there's no motive, and there's no clues, and it's also been at least 3 days or something since then, and Danica didn't even hear about it until basically whatever today is. So it seems a bit much that it's been really this long, and she didn't even hear about it until her mother decided to say it in front of a bunch of people.
Yeah. Just to be clear, the blackout was also the night that Luna's horn was stolen,
Hmm. Yeah.
and
And
Danica was there.
that was the area she was monitoring. And
Yeah.
she says that she was 3 streets away from these students and she didn't hear it happening. So that seems kind of insane for like bodies to be torn apart and not to hear it happening seems insane.
Well, yeah, she's definitely carrying around some guilt about it,
Hmm.
for sure.
Yeah. Um, so Danica kind of reminds Bryce that she has a date that night, and it's with a guy named Reed, and she completely forgot that it was happening. But Reed is apparently a hot human and a piece of shit, based on what Danica's saying. He works at his dad's company, where Danica does part-time security as a like second job.
So he's one of those people, like those rich, like daddy's number one son, executive, like, you know, you can just,
Rich white guy from a white family,
yes,
privilege.
yes, yes. Like, you can totally picture the
Hmm.
type of guy that he is, like a slimy douchebag.
They're supposed to go to like a frilly restaurant. Bryce takes 20 minutes to get ready for the date and says in her head basically that that's proof that she doesn't care because she usually takes an hour every morning to get ready, not including a shower, which is wild. Like, if I'm going out, which never happens anymore because COVID, I can definitely take an hour to do my hair and makeup while having a drink and screwing around. And by screwing around, I mean like laughing with people, not actually screwing around. But, like, I wouldn't be able to do that every day. I'd
No.
have to get up at like 6 in the morning earlier. I can't even imagine. I work from home and I can barely roll out of bed on time.
Yeah, she's definitely, like, I don't want to say high maintenance in a negative way, but she definitely cares about her appearance
Hmm.
on a regular basis.
Yeah. Which, honestly, if you were living in a world where your identity was already putting you at the bottom, I can understand it, but I would be exhausted.
Yeah.
Yeah. So she also kind of talks about how she had a dream of being in the ballet, but she has the wrong body type. And this is kind of a huge debate, obviously, in the fandom, because in the book it says that she has generous curves, and people don't want her to be a larger woman.
Really?
Yeah, have you never seen this?
No.
Oh my god. If you ever see any fan art about like of Bryce, there's people always commenting either saying she's too skinny in the fan art or she's too big in the fan art. And obviously people can like imagine her however they want. But she's clearly an athletic, strong woman who has curves. So like she's too curvy allegedly to be in the ballet here is what they said to her.
Yeah.
She's obviously not stick thin. I don't know. I just think that she's
I,
a bit bigger than or she's average American size, probably.
yeah, I will say I find it easy to be too curvy for ballet. For ballet, you literally have to be a stick,
Yes.
like a
Yeah.
100 pounds soaking wet.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Well, when she comes out and she's dressed, she's talking about how short her dress is, and they're like, they're never gonna let you in, and they let her in later on. But so we're still at the house, and we get some. We're obviously still in Bryce's head, and we kind of get the idea that Danica and Thorn could be mates, and Thorn is another member of the pack. And they kind of just need more time to work it out. So Bryce is now getting ready to leave the house before her date. So she's in the kitchen and she takes 2 shots of gin, which honestly is relatable. I hated dating so much. I would always have a few drinks beforehand and then I'd like go out for drinks. Dating is not an easy thing for me specifically.
I don't. I didn't really date.
That's fair. It's probably for the best, to be honest. It's not a great world to be dating. Um, Connor, who is Danica's second, that we already talked about, he's also Danica's enforcer. So he does a bunch of shit that is insane, basically. And he would likely have been an alpha if not for Danica. And he is absolutely in love with Bryce. Like, he asks her out, but she clearly has some reservations because she doesn't want a veneer is the name of anything basically that's not human. So she doesn't want a veneer shoving into her business. She calls them territorial alpha holes. I honestly hate this term. I
Oh my
fucking
god.
hate it.
I love the term
Okay.
because like how else can you describe
Mhm.
somebody who is super possessive because of their alpha like nature? Alpha hole. Like
I get it. I get it. But I'm just like, I don't know. Just call him an asshole. I don't know. I hated it. And she uses it a lot. I kind of got used to it by the end of it, but I hated it. So Bryce kind of gets into how she, like her father, her actual father, was super possessive over her mother. And it seems like her mother has likely warned her off of veneer and like it was a horror story. Her mother did not have a good time. And she's kind of like relayed that onto Bryce. And Bryce is now like, nope, can't date anybody other than human because clearly they're all going to be the same, which they're not showing good signs. They all seem like they are. So you can't really falter for it.
yeah. They're all showing like possessive, protective things that when we were teenagers and read books would find it really romantic, but then as adults we're like, "Oh no." So like
Yeah.
legit, those are the things that as she's doing what we all think of now. She's going, "Oh no, I don't think so."
Yeah. Which is funny because and then like the next part, Connor kind of offers her a trial date, and she doesn't really want to because of his possessiveness, but also because she feels like a fuck up. But she's 23. So she's obviously a fuck up. I don't know how anybody else felt when they were 23, but I felt like a fuck up, and she's afraid that she can't love. At 23, I was like, I'm going to be alone forever. I'm never going to find love. Nobody could ever love me. I could never love anybody. Like, that's just 23. This is normal.
Yeah.
Par for the course.
Yeah, I don't think it's normal for you to have your life figured out at 23. And
No.
especially when they are talking about immortality, aka like 500 to 1,000 years. Like I wouldn't ex-
Wild.
I wouldn't expect to have my life figured out until I was like at least 200,
Exactly. Yeah.
right? But yeah, she's very I find that she's very I like aware of her friends' successes in comparison to hers.
Mm-hmm. Oh, definitely. Yeah.
Right? She talks about, Danica's success as an alpha and talks about Fury's success as an assassin and talks about Juniper's success and talent as a dancer. And she sort of is like, what do I have in comparison?
Yeah. And I think it's kind of telling that she's not more jealous of Juniper because she easily could have been, because that is what she thought really that she wanted. So I feel like there could have been a bit more jealousy there, but it's kind of nice that there isn't
Yeah.
for female relationships. But yeah.
But you can just sort of tell that Bryce has a lot of stuff going on. So it would make sense that she like I think she actually says in her head that she knows that what she could have with Connor would be really big,
Mm-hmm.
and she doesn't want to dive into that right now, and I think that's totally fair. And he's a bit pushy,
Mm-hmm.
like she knows that he wants something. The pack knows that he wants something, and it sort of like seems inevitable. And I can see her saying like, no, I'm not ready for that.
Well, also they're in their 20s and shifters live to 500 and Faye can live to 1,000. So like in your 20s, are you supposed to find the person that is going to be this big moment, this big love of your life? That seems wild. Um, so Bryce leaves for her date, and when she leaves, for some reason, as Bryce is leaving, Danica does say, "Love you" to Bryce, which Bryce is like shocked and doesn't really know why she's saying it. And it seems like maybe Danica knows that something might happen. So Bryce is kind of walking to her date now, and she's kind of thinking about how Veneer came to this world, and they came during the crossing, which was a rift that let them into the human world, which originally sounds exactly like ours. It was just humans and normal animals. And then basically the Veneer took over. And in Panjera, there's humans that are slaves, which is why there's an uprising there. And in Crescent City, there are still slaves, but it's not always humans. There's slaves for different reasons.
So yeah, I also took it the same way, that it's almost like this book is like forecasting our distant future of like all these fae and like magical beings coming in and taking over our world. Of course humans are going to be slaves.
mm,
But there are, yeah, like you said, other sort of beings. Like slavery is happening for a number of reasons, and we're going to get into that later.
so Bryce's date doesn't really go well. So he doesn't show up until she almost has a full bottle of wine gone, and she's waited at least 45 minutes, and he finally shows up. He doesn't even really apologize. He ignores her and checks his phone. She tries to have a conversation with him, and he alludes that she's stupid and can't understand anything about the war happening across the territory. And she's kind of like, well, fuck this. I don't have to deal with this. And she basically gets up from the table and she says, I'm leaving. And he's like, oh, she's going to the bathroom. That's fine. And she's like, nope, I mean, I'm leaving. And she picks up her bottle of wine and then she walks out with her bottle of wine. She steals a whole bunch of matchbooks, gives the hostess the finger on her way out, and is like, I'm done with this.
Yeah. It just, I like, if it were me, I don't know if I would have stuck around 45 minutes.
Well, she did say that if he didn't show up, she wouldn't be able to pay for the bottle of wine. So I understand why she stuck around. You can't just walk out without paying.
Yeah, I guess.
I also wouldn't leave if there was still wine. Um, so she has left this frilly restaurant, and on her way, she calls Juniper and Fury or texts them. And they all agree to meet at the White Raven. On the way, Bryce buys some more Mirth Root cigarettes, and this is kind of where it's clearly very different than all of Sarah J. Maas's other books, and I know it's new adult, so it obviously is more different. But there's not real any drug use in her other books that I can think of,
No.
or the F word quite so much, which I absolutely love. I'm here for it. So Bryce is waiting outside of the White Raven for Juniper and Fury, and she's looking at her messages, and she finally agrees to go on a date with Connor. She says that they'll go for pizza, and he says that he'll never keep her waiting. And it's one of those phrases that you're like, You can't say that, bro.
He should have knocked on wood.
He really should have. That's a good point. Um, he does tell her to go have fun, which is really sweet of him, I think. I enjoy that part.
I wonder though if it's just like his way of sort of not falling into that alpha hole narrative. Like he's telling her to have fun because he's purposefully doesn't want to like to become that alpha hole for her.
I know, but I kind of feel like he isn't that, and that she has put him in this place because she thinks that everyone's going to be like that if they're not human. And I feel like he was maybe different and he could have been better. You know what I mean? Without spoiling the next chapter, basically. Um, so Fury comes up behind Bryce, and she's a badass, obviously. And she, like, basically puts a gun up to Bryce's head. And Bryce is like, oh shit. And Fury's like, you'd be dead. And Bryce is like, what the fuck? Like, I was just standing here happy for a second, and now you're going to do this. And Fury's like, well, you got to pay attention. But Fury also brings a different kind of drug, light seeker, which to me seems cocaine like. I've never done cocaine, but based on what they're talking about it, seems like it's similar to cocaine.
Yeah.
And Bryce was a bit worried, and she was like, "Is that the new drug I heard about, synth, going around?" And Fury's like, never try synth. Like, don't go near it. That's kind of the end of that we hear about in the beginning. So they have a really wild night. Juniper isn't partaking in anything, and because she has to dance in the morning, but she does go off to screw a guy in the bathroom, which seems like it's a common occurrence in this club. Like, I don't know if it's just their friend group.
Yeah, they seem to me to be like really wild party animals. Like they
Yeah.
party hard.
But it also seems like that might not be such a wild thing in this world, maybe sleeping with people in a club. I don't know if it's just their friend group. Maybe it is, but I don't know. Anyway, we also kind of, there's a people having a party near there where they have favors made out of first light, and we kind of get a bit more that you generate first light when you do the drop. So you can then make favors out of this first light that you generate because you get a tiny bit of it. Um, so it's just a tiny bit more that we
Yeah.
get about the drop,
It's like you can make glow sticks.
which sounds pretty cool. So by the time Brace is done partying, she's like hella fucked up. She gets home and she doesn't even know how she got there. She can't imagine walking up the stairs, so she just leaves her shoes downstairs. She's trying to get into her apartment. She can't remember the passcode, and she eventually figures it all out and gets upstairs. And the door is unlocked, and there's blood there, and she thinks she's hallucinating, and she's obviously not. So she goes inside, and the entire apartment is basically fucked up. And she goes into her bedroom, and she can tell that the puddles of basically pulp, I think she even calls it, one is Danica, and one is Thorn, and one is Connor, like literally on her bed. And she hears something outside, and she takes a leg of the table to follow it, and she launches after it. And when she catches up, she knows it isn't Veneer. She thinks it's possibly a demon, and it's literally feasting on an angel. So she's ran through like the street, jumped over cars, all barefoot, all with a party dress on, all while extremely fucked up on drugs and alcohol. And she's in an alley where there's an angel being basically devoured to the point that she can't even tell what he looks like, and a demon. And she tries to fight the demon off, and gets a huge scratch on her thigh from its claws. And it runs away, kind of deciding that it'd be too much work to fight off Bryce because she's just not giving up. And Bryce really just wants to run after it because she knows that this is what killed Danica in the pack. But she feels bad and goes to save the one person in the alley that's like still alive and bleeding out basically. So she goes over to the angel and like she calls Crescent City Rescue, which is basically 911, and gets them to track the angel's phone. And it's like a super distressing call, and they finally come get her.
Yeah, and I feel like it also needs to be said that angels are also like common occurrences. Like
Mm,
they're just sort of a member of the veneer.
yes.
So
Yeah.
it's not wild for an angel to be walking the street.
No. Normally flying the streets, but. So next chapter, basically, Bryce is in a holding cell, and we get Isaiah's perspective. And Bryce is still fucked up now, and it's likely more grief and trauma at this point than it is the drugs. Um, Hunt Athlar comes into the room, and he's the Umbra Mortis. So he shows up to see if she's said anything yet. So they were both in the alley with her, and basically immediately after the CC rescue shows up. And Hunt was the one who was able to calm her down, basically by telling her to snap the fuck out of it. And he also staples her leg wound closed with battle equipment. And you'd kind of think that like maybe an ambulance would have gotten there and kind of taken care of her, but no. This random warrior just fucking staples her leg closed, and they're like, that's good medicine.
Well, I sort of took it as like obviously the ambulance hadn't gotten there yet and he was nervous because she was half human, half fae, hadn't made the drop
Mm,
yet. He was concerned she was going to die, so he stapled her leg shut.
yeah,
But I agree with you. She should have gotten some extra care once the ambulance got there, but I guess they were too sort of focused on the saving the angel.
true. Yeah. Um, so Hunt then had left the alley to hunt down the demon because that is kind of his job is a demon hunter. But he didn't have any luck, and he at that point obviously didn't know what the hell was happening. So when he gets back to this holding cell, he's told that Danica and the pack are dead, and it's kind of a shock, I guess, to him ish because they kind of look at Danica as the party princess, and they don't really think much of her at this point.
Yeah, so again, like Danica's famous, so she's always in the tabloids. So whenever she does anything, it shows up in the newspapers. So they all have this opinion of her as being this party princess, even though she has a job where she has to like patrol the streets and like
Hmm.
guard everything, right?
Yeah. So Briggs is then arrested for the murders of Danica and the pack. Clearly, someone summoned a demon, the demon that had attacked the angel. So it makes sense that it was him because he was just released from jail and they're the ones that put him there. Isaiah is the commander of the 33rd, and Hunt is a part of the 33rd. And they're both slaves because they were originally part of a rebellion against the Republic. And they both have two tattoos that mark them as slaves. One is like a halo on their forehead, and that kind of binds their magic and makes them a lot less powerful. And another is SPQM on their wrist. And any slave in Crescent City has that on their wrist. Sabine shows up, and she's a raging bitch at this point. She threatens to kill Bryce for taking the sword, and she blames Danica for getting herself killed, like all in one breath. She's very clearly upset, but she's also like worried about the wrong things. Um, so Hunt kind of takes her away so that she's she doesn't go in and kill Bryce, basically.
Yeah.
Um, Victoria, who is a wraith, kind of tries to go in and talk to Bryce, and it's clear that Bryce is in shock. Like she's not answering any questions. She's not even looking up.
She's when I read it, she was like vacant, like a body with
Mhm.
with nothing there,
Yeah,
right? And rightfully so. Like apart from her mother and stepfather, everybody she cared about essentially was just murdered.
yeah,
So she's just not nobody's home.
exactly. We do get something from Hunt's mind. Like Hunt apparently marks Sabine like he's planning on killing her one day, which I thought was maybe interesting and is something to mark. Maybe it's foreshadowing. Maybe it's not. Again, I haven't read the next book. I don't know what's going to happen. There's 3 books. We'll see. Um, so Hunt is looking at Bryce's file too at this point, and Fury is apparently high up enough there because Hunt saw her name on Bryce's file and was shocked. He's been asked to kill her twice by Micah, and both times was called off because somebody stopped him, basically. They So when Victoria's in there, they read through Bryce's text and make her listen to the audio of Danica and the pack dying, which is insane and traumatizing. They say that Bryce is a witness, but they're clearly not treating her like one. And Bryce eventually just loses her shit, which is unsurprising. She flips the table, she flips a chair, and then she throws up a few times. And she says that she kind of just wants to go home. But her apartment is trashed and she can basically never go back there. Uh, Naomi gets a call and then calls Isaiah and says, "You gotta let Bryce go." And Isaiah's like, "Why would we do that? Like, what are you talking about?" And apparently, Rune Dannon has called and said that they're not allowed to have Bryce there. So Bryce, they let her go, and she leaves one way, and then another way, Rune comes bursting into the room, and Rune and Hunt get into it kind of verbally over what's going on.
Yeah, so we don't actually know at this point Rune's sort of relationship with Bryce, just that he has a relationship. And it's sort of his clout that allows her um, to be released. But, they sort of obviously they don't have a great relationship. Otherwise, she would have waited for him.
Yeah,
Um, But so I really enjoy this particular section. Not like it's a very sad part. Like all of these characters died before we really got a chance to know them. But it's just one of the things I really love about Sarah J is how she manages to like flesh out characters enough that in 6 chapters 70 pages, like you feel so, and I'm saying this as you're reading, you feel so sad and like you're lamenting their death and you feel so bad for Bryce, the fact that all these people were taken from her. And I really like love that. All of these characters we didn't really get a chance to know, but yet through her writing, you're still really sad that they all died.
yeah.
I just
And like, she even gets into little pieces of each character of the pack. Like, even that first time in Bryce's apartment, like, you can't really get into each person, but she does in the book get into little descriptors of each person, and like, more so than we ever did, obviously in this, but you feel for them all, like, if you actually read it without knowing what's going to happen, it's devastating
yeah.
because you feel like there's going to be so much more for each of these characters. You get a little bite of Danica and Thorne might be together, and you're like, oh yeah, that sounds like something I'd want to read about. It's it's wild, and yeah, her writing is just amazing.
It's very immersive,
Mm-hmm.
right? Anyway,
Mm-hmm.
so I guess we sort of get a skip ahead a little bit and we learn that Bryce is not welcome at Danica's funeral and the rest of the pack's funeral. And like I sort of expected it with Sabine being like the bitch that she is. Like, I can sort of see that.
Yeah, running in and being like, I'm going to kill her. Where's my sword?
Yeah.
But you wouldn't really think it from any other reason, like, other than Sabine. Like, why wouldn't she be welcome there? It's her best friend. So it kind of feels a bit wrong in the beginning.
Yeah. We also learned that the way they do their funerals is a bit different. So we didn't mention it before, but the city, like we sort of talked about how the city is made up of quarters and each quarter has a leader. One of those quarters is called the Bone Quarter, and it's literally where like all the souls go. It's like the underworld of Greek mythology with a Hades ruler and everything, except it's not underground. It's just like across the river. Like you can see it.
The river Styx.
Yeah. It's very reminiscent of that, but like
Hmm.
so you can see the land. Nobody goes over there if you're alive. Like if you're alive, you don't step foot on that island, but
Hmm.
everybody can see it. Like if you go to the river, there it is. It's just
Yeah.
hanging out for everyone to see. Um, so the way they do their funerals is they do what's called a sailing. Again, sort of like
Vikings?
yeah, like Vikings. So the body gets packed in a black sailboat and they sail it across the river, which is called the Istros, towards the Bone Quarter, the Bone City. And if they are worthy, then they are admitted, and I guess, their soul is admitted into the Bone Quarter, and that's where they spend eternity. If they aren't, then the sailboat tips over
Hmm.
and their body is then given to the river. And apparently there's lots of like nasty uh monster type things living in there that's going to eat their body, and it's like the height of shame if you're not worthy, so if your
Yeah.
body tips. uh so yeah, so she's not welcome at that. Apparently, she mentions that she's been a shell for like the whole week. She hasn't been eating anything, she hasn't been drinking anything. Her mom came in. So her mom sort of lives in this like small town of a few hours away from the city. So her mom came, they were staying in a hotel. She hasn't been eating or drinking anything. But the day before the funeral, she went and spent all of her money to buy Danica another private boat and lets it sail on her own. And we don't really know if it tips or if it continues. It sort of just, it doesn't mention it, but it sort of just shows her opening her eyes and like lifting her gaze. So she's finally awake again after being this shell for a week. And that's it. That's all we get. So then we move into part 2, which is called The Trench, and it's 22 months later. So she goes from being a 23-year-old, just lost her best friend, to a 25-year-old. We're sort of seeing how she's put her life back together. So she goes back, she's at the White Raven 22 months later for a meeting with a vampire who's buying some art, some like antique from her. His name is Maximus Tertian. Right before she had her meeting with him, she went in the bathroom and had a quickie with a lion shifter, which like seems real fun. Like if I were to do it with any form of shifter, lion shifter is not a bad way to go. But I found it funny. So she sort of like suggests that she has to go to a meeting. He wants to like hang out more. And she's like, oh, sorry, I have a meeting. So he automatically assumes that she's a whore because I guess it was really easy to get her to agree to this quickie in the bathroom. And she doesn't even
She doesn't correct him.
know. She just says, he's like, oh, I don't have any money. She's like, oh, that's okay.
It's on the house.
It's like, I would be a lot more.
I'd be
sort
like,
of.
excuse me, sir?
Yes, I'd be a lot more offended if somebody called me a whore.
And yeah, I'd be like, you can take my number and buy me a drink later.
Yeah.
But
She doesn't, yeah, she doesn't want any of those connections, I guess.
no,
She mentions that Juniper is usually too busy to hang out, and Fury doesn't take her calls anymore, which sort of, I totally understand that people deal with grief in their own way, but the whole thing with Fury really bothers me. That Fury essentially ignores her
hmm
for 2 years, like doesn't take any of her calls, won't talk to her. Like they were such good friends, and Danica died, and in Fury's grief, like completely alienated Bryce, and
yeah,
that just, I don't know, you like, ideally when something tragic like that happens, you band together, you don't drift apart. And
yeah.
I don't know, it it upset me. But like it just seems like she's placing fault on Bryce for the murders that obviously were not her fault.
Well, yeah, that's how Bryce feels for sure.
Yeah.
Like we get into the end of the book, Fury kind of gets into her deal, but at this point, Bryce
Yes.
100% feels like Fury's blaming her.
Yeah. We also get a rundown on First Light. So you mentioned that uh, when I guess Veneer make the drop, they emit First Light. First Light is essentially the energy source, like the magic almost, that powers the whole city. So it's emitted by Veneer or Fae when they make the drop into immortality, and it's used for everything. So it's what powers their electricity, their cars, all their technology, like all their cell phones. It's used in healing, it's used for spells. Like it literally is what makes their entire world go round. Sort of like oil and gas here. um, so when Fae decide to make the drop, when they decide that they're ready, they do it in a special government facility. You don't just do it anywhere. You go to a special government facility room, and as you make the drop and you come back out of it, your first light, it's emitted from you, and these special government rooms suck it up and they collect it. Um, so we said that it's like a psychic drop into your power, and your mortal body starts to die. So you have to race down the psychic tunnel to the bottom of your power. Like you have to go to the very bottom of your power and then race back up before your brain is deprived of oxygen. So they say that you usually have around 6 minutes um, to to make that drop and come back. And they describe it as coming back up. You have to make the leap back into life. It's like it's like leaping off a cliff back into life. But you can fall and die when you make that leap, and that's why you need an anchor. Like you need a tether to life.
Mhm.
If you don't have an anchor, you die because there's nothing to sort of help you generate the amount of push you need to make the jump back into life and to sort of
So,
kickstart your body again.
yeah, it's almost like the will to come up. Your anchor is somebody generally that you trust that will help you have the will to make that leap, really, because it does sound like it's a harrowing leap that you have to take
Yeah.
to get back up.
Um, after her meeting where she sells this vampire guy some art, and he propositions her for sex, and she says no, thank you. Her cousin. So we find out that Rune Danan is her cousin. That's what they tell people. But it's actually her half brother. So he is full Fae, and he is a powerful Fae
And handsome as fuck.
and handsome. Yeah, he's
I I don't know if I like want to marry him or if I want to be him, but both. Like I'm in love with him for sure.
Yeah.
just as an aside.
Um, so yeah, but they do not get along. So he shows up at the Raven, their bar, um, to sort of keep his eye on her, and they do not get along. She is snarky with him. She's just pushing all of his buttons. We don't really know what happened, just that it sort of mentions that they used to get along and like go against their dad together, but now there's like they don't like each other. The whole reason he's there is because apparently there's a summit of all the sort of a bunch of really important people in a month, and her father has ordered her to lay low. And the summit is for other leaders to come and like plan things and air grievances with each other, and sort of like it's like municipal city planning but for a whole world.
Yeah.
We also learn that she hasn't had anything to drink or any drugs in the 2 years since Danica, which like I sort of get. You know, she was so messed up on drugs that and all this happened. I can see it. It's not something that I ever desire to be. And like again, maybe it's different when you realize that you have hundreds and hundreds of years ahead of you. Maybe like
Mm,
partying to that extent becomes desirable, but it's not something that I ever thought it's not something that ever appeals to me, is being that like
fucked up.
yes. Anyway,
Yeah.
so she's in a swanky sort of new apartment that only her parents and Juniper have been inside of. So it's this brand new apartment. She sort of described her other apartment as being like in a little bit of a seedy part of town, but her and Danica had it together. And now this is like a penthouse suite. So it's a really snazzy, swanky apartment. So in 2 years, she went from not being able to afford anything to a really snazzy penthouse. Um, so it looks like Danica's will paid for the apartment. So Danica like left it to her in her will. Which can you imagine being 23 and having a will?
She obviously knew something was going to happen anyway because she did like the I love you before, obviously looking at it later, the tattoo, like she knew.
Yeah. Anyway, so Bryce is still very resentful of this apartment. Like I guess for her it almost seems like she's still living the tragedy as if it happened like yesterday.
Mhm.
She's just so caught up in her grief even like 2 years later. It's all so fresh for her still. So she resents the apartment, but she also still stays in it.
Mhm.
So Bryce goes home back to her apartment and stays there. And then we get our first look at our Hunt POV. So this book does tend to go back and forth between the two of them. Sometimes maybe someone else, but usually it's just the two of them. Um, so Hunt is our Umbra Mortis, he's Micah's assassin, and he was just torturing some guy, just casually, like you do.
NBD.
Yeah. We learn a little bit about Hunt here. So he's been in Crescent City for 4 years. Before he belonged to Micah, he belonged to another archangel named Sandriel, who was his lover's, who is dead, Shahar. His lover, Shahar, is her twin sister. So Sandriel is, they were almost brother and sister in law, essentially. Uh, and then she owned him for years. He talks about how most of his work is in the assassination business, even though his official title for the region is that he's a demon hunter. So on paper, he hunts demons and makes sure demons don't like hurt or kill people in the city, but not on paper. He's an assassin.
Yeah.
Um, We get a little tiny bit about the rebellion. So Shahar, who is Hunt's former lover, thought that her sister was like a terrible person and like ordered her parents killed. Um, Shahar was part of a rebellion that rebelled against the Asteri, so that six people that like rules over the entire land. They rebelled because of, I guess, the political dynamic. You know, the mistreatment of humans, the mistreatment of other beings, and they all rebelled, but they lost. Sandriel, the archangel, blames Hunt for his sister rebelling. I guess she thinks that she would never have done it if it wasn't for him, and that it's his fault that the two twins battled to the death, which seems ridiculous to me. Like, you're a you must be a narcissist, because how on earth could you killing your sister in a battle to the death be somebody else's fault?
Well, it's what you want it to be, I guess.
I guess. Um, Hunt has a deal with Micah that for every life he or his legion, so when he helped in the rebellion, he was captain of a legion of troops. For every death that they took on the battlefield, he would pay back to Micah, who was obviously on the other side of the conflict. So it's sort of like a death for a death situation. His legion took 2,217 lives, and he has to kill that many people in Micah's name, and then Micah will release him and make him a free person again.
Allegedly.
Allegedly. His number right now, so again, we said he's been in Crescent City under Micah for 4 years. His number's at 82. So
It's going to be hot second.
it will take him about 108 years if he keeps going at his current trajectory. It'll take him about 108 years to become free, which, I
Wow.
mean, could be worse, I guess.
Well, yeah. When we hear about what happened to him before up to this point, like, better than the alternative, I guess.
Yeah. So, how he got his name, I think, is really clever. So, his name is Hunt, but his actual name is Orion, after the hunter, the constellation in Greek mythology. The only thing that I don't like is that he's considered, Orion the hunter is considered the greatest hunter on earth. And he killed a whole lot of dangerous creatures. That part I'm here for. Yes, name your kid Orion. However, in mythology, Orion the hunter also got super drunk and raped a girl named Mariope, so her dad blinded him. And I don't know if maybe not a it's not a great
Namesake?
no. Like, you're naming your son after a rapist. And actually the whole reason he died is because he told Artemis he was going to kill all the creatures in the forest for her, and she was like, no thank you, I don't want you to. He was like, well, I'm going to do it anyway, so she killed him.
Fair. I would too.
So I don't know, it just seems like it's not a great namesake.
Yeah.
So I guess this is sort of our next day. Hunt and Isaiah go to Griffin Antiquities at Bryce's gallery, and they go to see her. She tries to ignore it and pretend they aren't there, pretend nothing even happened, even though she's like living as this empty shell, essentially. I love how snarky and attitudey she is.
Yeah.
Like,
Same.
she doesn't let, and not saying she's not intimidated, but literally an assassin and the captain of essentially the city police come to your door. I would be a little intimidated.
Yeah. 100%.
But she doesn't show that she's intimidated. She doesn't flinch. She just is super sarcastic with them, and I
Mm-hmm.
love it.
Yeah.
She's totally prepared to ignore them and not let them in, and then they're like, oh, there's been a murder. So she's like, oh shit, I gotta let them in. Turns out the person that died was the vampire that she met with and sold art to, Maximus. Apparently, he died in what's called the meat market, which is a place to get all manners of things, both legal and illegal. Um, so she's like plays everything really close to the chest and like doesn't like let her face betray anything. But Hunt sort of makes no he sort of assumes that she's like this party princess and like sees her address and knows that she lives in a penthouse and assumes that she's got a lot of money and that the money is coming from these shady dealings. And us as readers, like, we know differently. We know that she like doesn't really have any money and that it's completely um all Danica's will that has left her this apartment, and she's not actually drinking anything anymore. Um, so we know differently, and I found it really like pissed me off.
Frustrating.
Yeah, because you want to like
Same.
you want to stick up for her, right? You want to
Yeah.
defend her because she's just been through so much crap, and
Yeah.
obviously you can't because it's a book.
Yeah.
But you almost want to like shake him and be like, she's not what you think she is, and like stop being a jerk to her. She's dealt with a lot of shit.
Exactly. Yeah.
Hunt also, so he's the one that stapled her leg shut. And I guess he sort of knew enough about battle healing to know that it would have caused serious injury. And he sort of sees her. She's wearing like this, fancy dress and these like really high stiletto heels. So he assumes that she got the scar on her leg completely taken care of and removed uh, by a meta
Magic.
witch, by magic, to keep her body sort of like in pristine condition to party in, which is also really just disrespectful because like you don't know her.
Presumptuous.
Yes. You don't know her life. Um, they sort of say, whatever killed Danica is back, and that's what killed Maximus. So they sort of insinuate that it couldn't have been the human Briggs, Philip Briggs, because he's been in jail this whole time. Um, Micah, the archangel, is on his way to the gallery. So that's sort of why they shut up. They're like, yeah, hey, our boss is coming. And Bryce on the inside is like freaking out. Can you imagine if, the you're just hanging out at work and some really hot guys come by and are like, so the president's on his way here. Like you just be like, I'm sorry, what? Like, you would want to freak out.
Yeah. 100%.
But she keeps like a complete straight face. She doesn't want them to know she's scared or intimidated. It's one of my favorite things about her as a character
Hmm.
is how she is like such a poker face and she hides it with sarcasm and I love it.
Same.
Um Obviously the gallery has a secret black market section. I mean, obviously.
What gallery doesn't?
I actually wonder what gallery. Do you think they all do?
I don't know. I hope so.
Uh, so I guess she secures some things there, and just as she's ready, um, Micah comes, and he is described in the book as sex incarnate. I don't know. Like, how can you be sex incarnate? How can you be sex itself? But apparently, he's drop dead gorgeous with a voice. Like, this part was hilarious, a voice that could make someone come just by whispering in their ear. Like, I,
Which is just wild. Because, like, I don't know. After the first time I read it, thinking back on him, I forgot that he was supposed to be good looking at all. And then I read it again this time and I was like, shit, really?
and in all fairness, like, he's not a terrible character. Like, he's not a terrible person. Like, he's made out to be really fair. Like, he's a fair
Hmm.
ruler.
Yeah, well, he has this deal that he's sticking to with Aquilar, and he's much better than Sandriel. So, like, he does seem decent, but
Yeah.
I didn't think he was hot as fuck, being honest.
Apparently he is.
Yeah,
Uh anyway, if only it were that easy.
right.
Um the tattoo on Hunt's wrist you mentioned is SPQM. It's tattooed on all slaves of the realm. It's Latin for Senatus Populusque Midgard, the Midgard Senate and people. Uh, so like it just sort of lends more credence in my brain that it's future Earth,
Hmm.
where there's no way that a fantasy realm would have Latin,
No,
right? So it has to be just future Earth and like cell phones and all that. Come on.
yeah.
Um, yeah, Bryce says that in her mind, she really dislikes that they are like they sort of have to be slaves. And again, you can immediately tell because they have that halo, like a black halo of ink on their foreheads, which sort of honestly, it's like a black halo of thorns.
Hmm.
It like don't quote me on this, but like it reminds me of like the crucifixion, like
Hmm.
when, Jesus had to put on that crown of thorns.
Yeah,
It's like
100%.
it's totally reminiscent of that, except it's a tattoo on their forehead.
Yeah.
So you can immediately tell when somebody's a slave and you can treat them accordingly. Now,
Hmm.
obviously, being the Umbra Mortis, he sort of gets an extra level of respect. But, I guess the idea of servitude and slavery is not palatable for Bryce, rightfully so.
Hmm.
Um, we also learn that her leg is not healed at all. It's in a lot of pain, but she fights the limp. I don't know how you can fight a limp
In high heels,
in high heels.
sky high heels.
I, at all. I do not
No.
understand how you can force yourself to not like it's a visceral reaction. I did like you can't help it. But
Yeah,
apparently she can because she's too proud and doesn't want to show anybody weakness. Which again, I low key love about her.
but also don't understand.
Yes. It's like sheer will that is causing her not to limp. And I just don't see how your mind can control your body that way.
Maybe it's a faith thing.
Maybe. But like I just in my head, to an
Hmm.
extent, yes. But like if you are bleeding, you cannot say to your body, stop it.
Well, you can, it just won't listen.
That's it. It's not going to listen to you. So
Yes.
I don't understand how you can just say to your body, I'm not going to limp, I'm not going to limp, and then
Yeah.
not limp when you're wearing stilettos and like
Yeah.
a mini dress. Um, Micah has come to her office because he wants Bryce to help solve Danica's murder and this new murder, since she's the only one who's actually seen the demon. She's the only one that saw what it looked like. Apparently, none of the other officers can find it. They don't know what it is or what it looks like, so she has to. He wants her to help. He says that the reason why, because she's sort of like, I mean, it's been 2 years. Why do you want me to do this now? And he makes no secret of, um, it's not just about the fact that there could be a murderer in my city killing citizens, but with this summit coming up next month where other leaders are going to come into his territory, it could be calling his effectiveness into question if there's like
Hmm.
a demon roaming around free. So he's worried that he could be removed. And Sandriel, Hunt's old owner, apparently, like makes no secret that she would really like his job.
Yeah.
So he's like, I want you guys to solve this before the summit, before this meeting. We have a brief mention of Sandriel's captain of her guard, which are called the Triari. Pollux, who's a his nickname is the Hammer, and apparently he's a big dick.
He has a big dick?
No, he.
Sorry.
Oh, oh, no. So he is a big dick. We'll hear more about him after. Hunt and Bryce apparently will be investigating everything together. So,
which is, it's news to Hunt as well at this point, which is kind of funny.
Yeah. So everything that Hunt mentions, so like he's constantly thinking to himself, oh, she's doing this. I hate that about her. She does this. She's so prissy. Like everything that he mentions about Bryce is a complete front. So like he thinks she's a prissy, rich princess. She only has an apartment that's fancy, and it's because it was willed to her by Danica. She's actually quite poor. He thinks she's ridiculous for wearing stiletto heels, and she makes a mental note that the shoes hurt like hell, but she needs to be professional. He thinks she's like super vapid and shallow, but she's lost so many people, so she's literally doing that to prevent people from getting close to her. Like, she's just so hurt. He thinks she got her scar removed to keep her looking beautiful. She didn't, and it actually causes her a lot of pain. And, you know, we sort of don't know if she can get it removed. Why didn't she get it removed?
Mm-hmm.
So I sort of love that for everything he dislikes about her, there's an actual truth behind it.
Yeah.
And, you know, it just makes you want to like shake him, and also at the same time be like, hurry up and get to know her so you can figure out that all these things are a lie.
Yeah, for sure.
Anyway, Micah then offers, so I guess they leave, and Micah offers Hunt a new deal. So it was 2,217 deaths. He says, if you find the killer before the summit, I'll reduce the amount of deaths you have to complete to 10. So it went from like 2,000 to 10. He could be done in 6 months. So obviously that's an attractive offer. Bryce is sort of spiraling. Like, she can't believe that Danica's murderer is still out there. She sort of thought that with the arrest of that human, Philip Briggs, with his arrest, that at least her murderer was being put away and she could rest easy knowing that justice was served. But turns out that's not the case. So she starts to spiral. We sort of learn that she doesn't like her job, which I find weird because her job actually seems really sweet. Like, it seems really cool.
Yeah, I
She,
agree.
right? Like, she has like shady meetings in clubs. She gets to like sell really like old famous antiques. She gets access to like a secret black market area.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it doesn't seem that bad.
As jobs go, no.
No, and it does tend to seem like she gets to pretty much not make her own hours, but her hours seem very flexible.
Yeah.
However, her boss, Jessica, is apparently always threatening to turn her into some form of animal. I mean, just from the short amount of time we've heard of Jessica and seen Jessica at this point, I still don't believe it.
I know, right? I think we need some proof in the next book.
that she would do it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And apparently she also has to deal with like snotty veneer, like rich people all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Which in my mind is like, you work in customer service. I feel like that's just a given. Like,
Yeah,
you got to
exactly.
deal with it.
That's just life in customer service.
Right? When we worked at the coffee shop, it was brutal dealing with customers. Anyone who tells you the customer is always right, that is not true at all.
Yep.
They are mostly wrong. Anyway, but I digress. Apparently she has like resumes in the works, but she never submits any. She says she doesn't think Jezebel would let her quit, let her out of her job because of her debt. So she's really poor, and apparently she's like paying.
Indebted to her boss.
Yeah, but we don't know what it is.
Yeah.
Um, she sort of brings up Connor's last messages to her before he died. So he sort of, Connor's last messages again were, the whole thing, yay, we're going to go for pizza, have a good time, and I'll never leave you waiting. So she's sort of, that's constantly running through her mind, right? And can you imagine, like, she's having this spiral of grief, and she still has all of his messages on her phone, so she's just sitting there reading them. And there was a really sad quote here that like hurt my soul. It says, it hurt enough to feel through every part of her body. So like looking through the texts, hurt enough to feel through every part of her body, the dark remnants of her soul. So she always looked. So it's like she keeps punishing herself by looking at his texts, by keeping the scar. Like she's broken and she's hurt, and she like is insistent that it's her fault.
It's survivor's guilt.
Yes. And so she keeps punishing herself to keep her soul fractured.
Because if she's not punished, then if she doesn't feel guilty for being alive and upset that they're gone, then she's a terrible person, is how she feels.
Yeah. It's a heartbreaking moment. She's like sitting there debating whether she should look into their murders, all the while she's like reading Connor's texts, knowing that like, whatever they could have had will never happen.
Mm-hmm.
Um After all that, we get a little bit we get into Rune. So Rune Danan is another one of our main characters. He's not like our Bryce and Hunt main characters, but he's almost an equal third, I find.
Yeah.
So we get his POV for a little bit. We learn that he is a prince. His dad is the Autumn King and sort of the leader of all the Fae in the area. That means is also Bryce's dad. So Bryce's mother, the human, is Ember, and her dad, the Fae, is the Autumn King. So that's how she has her half and half. Apparently, he's a big old. Not apparently, he is a really huge asshole. Her dad, the Autumn King, like, and we sort of knew that anyway because Ember, Bryce's mom, had a really rough time.
Mm-hmm.
So he's actually a bigger asshole than Sabine even.
Yeah.
And he has raised Rune. We get a little bit more about Rune as a person, as a fae. So each, I guess, type of supernatural being, like they all have military. So I guess Rune heads up the Fae Auxiliary. So the sort of the army soldiers for the Fae. So he's headed them up for 15 years. He's essentially a trained killer. So even though he's a prince, he's also like a fighting machine. He mentions that he is starborn, but we don't really know what that means as of yet. I already said before that he used to get along with Bryce, but then they got into a huge fight. And he said some things, even though we don't know what they are. And she hasn't forgiven him at all for those things, which sort of tracks with her as a character. Like she seems grudgy.
Yeah, for sure.
Um, Apparently, when she met her father at 13, he was cruel to her and he made her cry. And that's when Rune sort of saw the light as to what kind of asshole his dad was.
Mm-hmm.
The Autumn King's magic is like fire, but Rune's magic is shadows and mist, like his mother. He's 75 years old, so he's still quite young for a fae. Apparently, his mother was chosen for the specific purpose of breeding. So, like, the Autumn King saw her pedigree, thought they would make a successful child and a powerful child, and they had sex, had a baby, and now she is kept. Like, the Autumn King cares for her.
Not cares, but
Not cares for her, but cares for her needs. Like,
not emotionally,
not
but physically.
emotionally, but not even physically like that. Like,
No, not even like that. This is a hard one to sell.
yeah, he essentially pays for her upkeep,
Mm-hmm.
but does not.
Wish to ever have sex with her again.
Yeah, she's not his wife. She's not his mate. She's just the mother of his child, and he bought her a lovely villa and barely ever talks to her, but she is like still, she's one of these, I guess she was bred knowing that this is what she was made for.
Mm-hmm.
So she's very like appreciative that he chose her to have a child with.
And for the life that she probably has now, it's probably better than she might have had if she wasn't chosen. So
Good point. Yeah, I didn't even think of that too. I wouldn't mind being a kept woman, but
yeah.
but not in the same way. Not in the way that she is. So we finally get a little bit more about him being a starborn. It's a starlight power. So he has the power of starlight. So he can summon a small seed of starlight from his magic and have this small seed of starlight. And he has this fancy sword called the Starborn Sword that calls to him and vibrates for him and, answers to him. And he had to go through like this trial in order to get it. He was deemed worthy and pulled it out. It was very like King Arthur with Excalibur.
Mm-hmm.
And his dad really resented that he did it. And the king himself could not, even though he tried like so many times to get the sword, he couldn't. And then his son, who he deems as inferior to him, did get the sword. So he totally resents his son for that and therefore treats him like an a-hole.
Yeah. I think he might have anyway treated him like a piece of shit, but even more so now because of that.
Yeah. I guess his dad, Rune and his dad have a conversation, sort of like an impromptu meeting. They don't really act like father and son. They just act like commander. Yeah, like commander and captain. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's a very formal relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And his dad requested that he look for the Luna horn that was stolen the week before Danica died. So the same thing that Bryce was supposed to be looking for Jessica, now Rune is supposed to look for it 2 years later.
Mm-hmm.
Apparently it belonged to the Fae, but they donated it to the temple as an artifact. And now the dad is saying, the Autumn King says, we want it back.
Mm-hmm.
He thinks that Fae power is diluting. So he thinks this is a symbol of their strength and purpose. And anyway, it's all very like everybody is so power hungry
Mm-hmm.
in this world. Like everything everybody does for the most part is for power. And it just, I would not be able to survive in a place like that.
No. We'd also be slaves, so.
We would also be slaves, yes. Although I would hope that I would have been able to like marry up and like rise my station a little bit.
So you're going for power too, is what you're saying?
Oh crap, yes. Oh no, I would just be just like these people. Oh Okay. So also his dad sort of tells him that he's being betrothed to Hypaxia, who's a new witch queen that's being recognized at the summit next month. So he's got a new bride. He's not happy about it. I guess one of the other sort of rituals, it seems like they have a lot of rituals.
Mm-hmm.
They one of the rituals they do is they all go see an oracle when they're like a teenager. And apparently he told his dad that the oracle said about him that he would be a fair and just king. But he lied to his dad, and the oracle actually said, the royal bloodline shall end with you. So this has sort of been hanging over his head since he's been like a teenager. And he doesn't want to get married. He doesn't
Want
want
to
to,
try to have kids?
yeah, he doesn't want to do anything because he is worried that he's this oracle thing, the royal bloodline shall end with you. He believes that he's either going to die or he is unable to father children.
Yeah.
And he's also concerned, I think a little bit about Bryce because she technically has the same blood, like the royal bloodline. And, if it ends with him, that means she's not making it either. So,
Yeah. What is she if he's the end?
yeah.
Yeah.
So he sort of lied and hasn't told anybody what it really is because he's trying to ignore it.
Which is obviously the right way to go.
Yeah, always.
Yeah, so that wraps it up for this week. If you want to get in touch with us and share your thoughts on anything you heard in our episodes or have any book suggestions, you can email us at coffeeandcoread@gmail.com. And be sure to check us out on Twitter and Instagram at Coffee and Co Read. That's COFFEEANDCOREAD.
Yeah. So next week we'll be reading part 2 of House of Earth and Blood. So we're going to be doing chapters 15 to 32. So make sure to follow along. Figure out what happens next when Hunt and Bryce actually start working together. And if you're enjoying our little chats, don't forget to follow, rate, and review wherever you find content. Thanks for listening, everybody, and we'll see you on the next page.